Traditional martial arts suck. And I know I'm not some kind of trailblazer for saying this or anything. For years, people have been talking all about how traditional martial arts are fake, or just at the very least, they're not that good for fighting. There's also been countless examples of guys who do traditional martial arts getting absolutely stomped out by guys who do kickboxing and jiu-jitsu. Even the less crazy ones like Taekwondo are considered to be not that effective, because when you look up Taekwondo guys versus kickboxing guys, it honestly kind of looks like a joke. And not a funny one either. So I was having a conversation with someone on Twitter the other day, and we ended up talking about how traditional martial arts ended up getting to be as bad as they are. And it was an interesting topic that I think I want to talk a little bit about today. Now, I really don't want this to be the typical Kung Fu bad, MMA good kind of video, because we know why Kung Fu and other traditional martial arts are not that good, but we never talk about how they became that way. I think this is an important topic to discuss because it's going to help us to make sure that this doesn't end up happening again in the future. And before you think it can't, it can, and it will. This is quite literally what's happening to Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu right now with the IBJJF and a bunch of other tournaments that have their own little rule sets and things like that. There's a few different theories as to why this is, and it's actually a huge, multifaceted issue that comes down to a bunch of different things, and today we're going to be talking about a couple of them. The first one we're going to discuss is the issue of politics, power, hegemony, basically just control. So war is a double-edged sword, and if you're the leader of a nation, you're going to want to try and use it for its benefits, but also avoid any drawbacks that may come with it. Because of things like this, governments would end up cracking down on the teaching and use of martial arts throughout history, because if you're the leader of a nation, it really doesn't benefit you to have military-aged men training to fight for anything other than you. The monopoly of force is actually still a very contentious issue in the world today, and we have a bunch of different debates about it, including about self-defense, as well as certain political issues that I really try to avoid. In these historical cases, an instructor may end up getting arrested or even killed for practicing legitimate forms of combat, so they had to try and find a way around this. The answer that a lot of these guys had was to basically remove anything that was combat effective, or at the very least disguise it, and then throw in a bunch of stuff about how they're not actually training to fight, they're training for self-improvement. And since the government saw what these people were teaching was harmless, they basically just decided to let it go. And an interesting thing that you end up seeing is that eventually some of these bunk martial arts became cultural phenomenons in their countries of origin that would end up being exported to the rest of the world. This is not just where we get Kung Fu movies from, but it's also where we get these people who are 110% convinced that their eagle claw, butt tickle, death touch is going to actually work in real life. In addition to that, these ideas about the internal, about training for self-improvement and things like that have become so ingrained into martial arts that you still have people walking around saying weird things like, I train to fight so that I don't have to fight. It's basically become a marketing gimmick that's used to rope in parents who want to feel like their son knows how to protect himself, but they're also a little bit afraid of the idea of their son getting into a fight in the first place. One of the funny things about the crackdown in China is that it actually came around and bit them in the ass, because when they sent their TMA guys out into the world to fight people of other martial arts internationally, they ended up getting trounced. So they had to sit down and go, okay, our stuff ain't really working that well. If we can't beat them, we should probably join them. Let's create kickboxing in China. We're going to call it Sanda. Since I started karate, I've also noticed the difference in culture between Muay Thai and karate, where at one point karate was actually banned. If you talk to a karateka, that's what they call them, they'll talk all about how the most important aspects of karate are the internal, the self-improvement, trying to be the best that you can be. If you talk to a Muay Thai guy, he'll tell you all the best ways to cut somebody open with an elbow. So that's a cultural reason, or as I said, a power-based reason as to why certain martial arts ended up becoming bunk over the years. And like I said, there's plenty of reasons for it, and we're going to talk about one more. That other reason is a more historical or technological reason. What I mean when I say historical and technological is that if you train in a sword art, if you train in an art that requires you to swing swords and things like that in the 21st century, you're probably not going to get to use it much outside the dojo. What a lot of people don't realize is that there's a lot of armed martial arts that ended up influencing or basically giving birth to unarmed martial arts. If you take a look at this martial art, you'll realize that the unarmed portion is very similar or even the same as an armed portion of the martial art, or that this form of unarmed combat is basically the exact same as another martial art that requires swords or clubs or spears or whatever. One place you can see this play out is in Muay Boran, which is a predecessor to Muay Thai that's not really used for fighting anymore. It's more of a showcase kind of martial art. To further illustrate this, I actually filmed a segment at my gym that we're going to go and take a look at now. So I'm at my gym right now because as I was sitting there trying to explain what I want to say, I realized it's probably just better if I show you. So here I have 2 speed sticks, and these are tools that are really used for boxing training, but for the sake of argument, we're going to go ahead and pretend that these are swords. Now when it comes to swords, there's a bunch of different angles of attack that are all really good for different things. I can go over, I can go from the side, I can go up, I can stab from any of those directions as well. I can even thrust forward. And I'm not an expert in sword fighting, let alone Thai sword fighting, but when you tend to see Thai sword fighting, what they end up doing is they use a lot of this motion. So if you were to do it on the bag or a person, you would be here and you would see them go 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. Like I said, I'm not an expert. They probably do it a little bit better than I do, but that's the basic idea. Now, if I was a 6 foot tall, red-headed, pale Siamese warrior, and I was going into battle to kill people, I'd want to carry swords or some other kind of weapon because a sword is going to do the job a lot easier than my bare hands. And because of this, the majority of my training is not actually going to be in unarmed combat, but it's going to be in armed combat. I'm going to be training with the swords. Now, I don't want to go straight to unarmed combat in the middle of a giant battle like that, but if I happen to lose the sword somehow, then I really don't have much of a choice. I have to keep myself safe. And what's going to be the next best thing if I spend 90% of my time swinging a sword? It's going to be to ball up a fist and start swinging an imaginary sword. And what that'll look like on the bag is this. And like I said, I'm not an expert. I'm sure there's people who do it better than I do, but that's just the basic idea. Now, did that work in battle? I think that it could have. I mean, you're basically throwing haymakers. You could definitely knock somebody out with one of those, but it's not the most efficient way to try and hit somebody. And that's why when Western boxing hit the scene in Thailand, they took it, they added their own spin to it, and they threw it right into the modern art of Muay Thai. So if we were going to try to modernize this theory, we would basically replace swords with guns. And I know this is my cell phone, but we're going to have this be a stand-in for a gun. And I'm not really a gun guy, by the way. I've only fired guns a few times in my life. So if I do something wrong, it's because I don't really know what I'm doing. I'm just emulating what I've seen somebody else do. So if I was to try and fire a gun, basically I'd start with it in here, I'd extend out, and I'd shoot. And if I was in the middle of a battle and I lost my gun somehow and the only thing I knew how to do was that motion, basically what I'd do is I'd wait for somebody to get close enough to me while I'm sitting here like this, and I would extend out as hard and as fast as I possibly could to try and do as much damage as possible. And one of the interesting things that can sometimes happen once we've established that foundational technique is that we may try and build off of it. I might realize that I could do a downward smash or even come from the side. I might realize it's probably not a smart idea to have both of my fists like this, and I might separate them. Now, obviously that's ridiculous and I would never actually do that in a fight, but I'm just using that to illustrate the point. There's a bunch of different kinds of martial arts out there that if you take a good look at them, you realize they have a tinge of this inside of them, and not all of them are as theoretically viable as Muay Baran. If all we had today was edged weaponry and no scientific understanding of what the most efficient way to knock somebody out is, we may end up falling into a similar pattern. So that's the other reason that I wanted to talk about today. And I just want to reiterate that these are theories. I'm not saying that I 110% know these things to be fact. It's just these are things that I've picked up over the years talking to a bunch of different people with a bunch of different skill sets and a lot of knowledge in a bunch of different areas. I'm also aware that there's plenty of other theories out there, some of which may contradict what I've said to you, or some of which may even go hand in hand with what I've said to you today. I'm actually going to link a video in the description that I think is very interesting that talks about how Chinese martial arts ended up becoming the way that they are today. But that's all that I have for you today. If you enjoyed the video, leave a like and also sub for more. If you have anything you want to say, feel free to comment down below. And if you have any questions you want to ask me, feel free to hit me up on Instagram at ScottSullivanMMA. Other than that, thank you very much for watching, and until next time, good luck out there.